Propulsion system. Dragon then deploys its drogue parachutes to stabilize and decelerate the vehicle. Then just before drogue deployment, seats automatically rotate to 26 degrees, which we just saw there, to keep the crew within acceptable G limits for entry and landing. And
excellent view.
Great view. Drogue parachutes are deployed. View looking forward.
Drogue descent rate nominal.
Descent rate nominal, copy.
Again, we're going to hear a lot of comms throughout this next 3 minutes here. This is looking forward on the Dragon spacecraft up at the chutes. Those drogue parachutes are fully deployed now, so we do expect those main parachutes to deploy here shortly.
If you're just joining us, we have now confirmed that the AX-4 crew on their return home is roughly 2.5 minutes out from splashdown, and our main chutes have deployed.
Main chute descent rate nominal.
Copy. Main chute descent rate nominal, 1,000 meters for Dragon.
We copy 1,000 meters.
Great visual confirmation as well as those comms that the 4 main parachutes have deployed. Again, we are going to be slowing down the vehicle from 350 miles per hour all the way down to just about 15, 16 miles per hour by the time that the vehicle touches down and splashes down into the ocean.
Exactly right. You know, you mentioned these beautiful visual confirmations that we're getting. You know, an important aspect of today's specific splashdown is that it's occurring at night.
That's Dragon 800.
Copy 800 meters.
Commander Peggy Whitson confirming the spacecraft's altitude as it's making its descent into the Pacific Ocean just off the coast of San Diego in Southern California.
Yes, love that it's coming off the coast of my hometown.
600 meters.
600 meters.
And at 600 meters, we're just under a minute before that expected splashdown. The landing in water is a lot simpler and more reliable. Provides a little bit of margin against unlikely parachute issues. We did have to learn how to make Dragon waterproof as we are splashing down into the ocean. But
SpaceX copies 400 meters. Reminder to brace for splashdown.
Oh, that's a pretty cool view.
Yeah. That's right. Maintaining the vehicle's signature through things like cloud layer and any kind of atmospheric disturbance allows us to maintain visual contact with the vehicle as it's making its final descent towards water landing.
And it's a little foggy, as you can see there.
Yeah, Pacific fog is rolling in.
We've got some very bright lights as Dragon, you can see the ocean there. Dragon is about to touch down in just a few seconds here.
And working their way towards the vehicle are the SpaceX and Axiom support teams that will be present for the next phase of our splashdown coverage today. At this point, we'll be waiting for confirmation of the crew's safe landing, and then we'll move into the phases of this mission, which are really, let's recover the vehicle, let's recover the crew, let's make our assessments, and at that point, we'll be covering.
And we have splashdown of the AX-4 crew back on planet Earth.
Welcome home.
SpaceX Dragon splashdown. We are in stable 1.
SpaceX copies splashdown and stable 1. On behalf of SpaceX, welcome home.
And thanks for the great ride and the safe trip. And Grace is happy to be back.
We are happy to have you back home safely as well.
Some words between the Corps and our commander, Peggy Whitson, as the AX-4 crew has made it back home, splashed down at
Dragon SpaceX, for your awareness, SISTI system verifications are in progress. I will report back when recovery personnel are en route.
Dragon.
Yeah, so now you can see a couple fast boats are going to be approaching the Dragon spacecraft. They're going to start with making sure that the spacecraft is safe. They're going to do some sniff checks. They're going to pick up those main parachutes. As Dragon splashed down, the chutes were immediately cut to make sure there's no safety issues there. So we'll pick up those main parachutes up. And once the crew deems that the spacecraft is safe, then our recovery vessel Shannon can begin to approach and begin the recovery process. So we are now eagerly waiting on recovery of our Dragon spacecraft with the AX-4 crew. Dragon has already autonomously completed several steps to save itself following splashdown.
So for those of you just joining us, the return of AX-4 has gone smoothly so far, and we just got great confirmation that crew has splashed down. So Dragon successfully re-entered the Earth's atmosphere, followed by deployment of its parachutes to slow the spacecraft down to a gentle 15 miles per hour. And at that point, they successfully splashed down in the Pacific Ocean at 2:31 a.m. Pacific time, off the coast of Southern California. So at this point, like you mentioned, Jesse, we are just waiting for Dragon's recovery from Shannon.
Yeah, upon detection of landing, Dragon automatically releases the main parachutes to prevent wind from pulling the spacecraft. Dragon then automatically safes any pyrotechnics still present on the vehicle and may automatically perform additional minor system reconfigurations. The astronauts remain seated and in their suits at this point, but the onboard air conditioning keeps temperatures in check inside the spacecraft, and the communication systems on board remain powered so the crew can continue to communicate.
And as we're watching, SpaceX has two fast boats in the recovery fleet, which move very quickly to get to the splashdown point. And those are being followed by Shannon, the main recovery vessel, which will move into position upwind of the spacecraft. The two fast boats have very specific roles here in these operations. The first fast boat makes initial contact and is focused on immediate safety inspection of the vehicle, checking for vehicle integrity and any presence of hypergolic propellant vapors. This ensures that it's safe for Shannon to approach the Dragon spacecraft. Now, once Dragon is cleared for full approach, the team begins rigging the spacecraft for water recovery.
Well, you join us just as a historic moment has taken place. The AX-4 crew returning back to Earth. Thank you for joining us here on NewsX World as we cover this moment and this historic return from orbit. That for India, Poland and Hungary. The AX-4 crew has splashed down safely off of the coast of San Diego. On board are India's Shubhanshu Shukla, Poland's Slavoj Unaski Wisniewski, and Hungary's Tibor Kapu, a veteran commander, Peggy Whitson, as well, leading the mission. This is the first time all three countries have sent a government-sponsored crew to the International Space Station, and the first time in more than 40 years that these countries have flown astronauts into space. AX-4 also set a new record for science on an Axiom mission. Over 60 experiments were done, covering 31 different countries. From microgravity to life sciences, this mission proved the power of global partnerships. Axiom Space says it's building a new path for more nations to do research in low Earth orbit. For India, this is only the second time an astronaut has gone to space since 1984. For Poland, it's the second since 1978. For Hungary, the second since 1980, and the first time a Hungarian has reached the International Space Station. Well, while we continue to show you these live visuals, we know that SpaceX crews are currently making their way over to the space capsule that you can see floating. We heard at the end of that briefing there of this landing that the parachutes have been cut to avoid safety issues, and here we can now see these boats making their way towards the capsule, which is being kept at a set temperature. We know, of course, that there is a lot of health checks and safety checks that need to be made for anybody who comes back to space, and that will be taking place shortly. While we continue to show you these live visuals, we're also joined by Dr. Ravi Kumar Gupta, who is a former director of the DRDO, who is joining us from New Delhi. Thank you ever so much for being here with us. Let's look now at the significance of this moment. There is so much for us to talk about, but let's first look at these countries. Poland, Hungary, and of course also India as well, sending people to space for the first time in such a long period of time. What's the significance for those nations moving forward as the leaders of those countries and governments look towards space programming?
Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you very much for bringing me in. See, I take it that way. We in India always look at it as the entire world as a family, what we call it, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. So this XM4 mission is a perfect example of international collaboration. The people from different countries, different cultures, coming together, joining hands, to do something for the betterment of humankind. As you have just now, we have seen that the crew has just returned, and with 18 days in space, they have carried out more than 60 experiments, besides, of course, gaining a wealth of experience in this mission. They have conducted these experiments, which are going to, provide us more and more knowledge about, which will be helpful in improving the lives of the people here in Earth, and also when we go for long-term missions in space at that point of time. So this is I take it as a perfect example of international collaborations where we have to use this scientific knowledge for the betterment of humankind. Right?
Yes, absolutely. And of course, this a significant moment for that factor, this private mission that has been launched, of course, with those countries involved. Do you think this is the future of science in space? These sorts of flights like AX4, the mission, where different countries will be able to carry out their own experiments in low gravity, of course, looking forward to expanding not just our knowledge, but also looking forward with factors like sustainability and other key areas that we're trying to understand as humanity.
Sure. See, I believe that what we have achieved so far in space research, it is just a beginning. It's a small beginning, because space is vast. The entire universe is before us to explore and to learn about it, to learn the secrets of the universe, and to use the knowledge for the betterment of the humankind. So scientifically, we are just at the, I would say, at the first few steps of the ladder. What we need to explore is extremely vast. And these are baby steps, but we are going to space, setting up space stations, sending satellites, going to Moon, Mars, and the missions like Voyager, where we have gone right even beyond the realms of our solar system. But if you take a look at the entire solar system, entire universe, these are only baby steps. So I would say that this particular mission, XM4 mission, is a landmark event, of course, but nevertheless, it is just a small beginning. And India had made a slightly late beginning. We set up ISRO in 1969. Dr. Vikram Sarabhai was the person who laid the foundations of ISRO and space research in India. But we have come a long way from there. We went to space. We set up our own satellites. We went to Mars. We went to Moon. We were the first one to discover water on Moon. So these are the way we have been progressing. And But as I said earlier also, this is just a beginning, not only for humankind, even for India also. And we have lined up a large number of series of important missions. We are scheduled to go to moon to bring back Earth from there and analyze it further. We are scheduled to set up our own space station by 2035 and send the first module of the Indian space station by 2028. And by 2040, we are supposed to be there on landing on, sending a person, an Indian, on moon. So I think the entire world has to progress together because it is not just a kind of one person or one country alone cannot do whatever is supposed to be done and whatever is existing to be explored in the realms of space. So I think the entire world needs to come together and explore the space and enhance the level of our knowledge about space, about the universe, about the creation of universe, and where are we going from this point towards the future. All these things need to be explored. So all the best for that.
Yes, absolutely. And very quickly, but before we move on, Dr. Ravi Kumar Gupta, what is the process now for astronauts who have been in the International Space Station? Of course, a lot spoken about the two astronauts, Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore, who spent an extended time in space. But what is that process now that touchdown has been achieved, and how long will that recovery process be, given the difference in environment from, of course, space to being back on Earth?
Yes, this recovery process is also equally important because, after all, the human body is designed to work on Earth in the presence of oxygen and at a certain level of gravity. Now, once we come back after such a long time, like in this case, it is 18 days in space. It is like when a person comes out of a swimming pool, the kind of feeling which comes just after a couple of hours or even 1 hour. Now imagine what is the kind of feeling it is going to be after spending 18 days in the swimming pool without the gravity, without feeling the gravity. Our entire system is tuned to work in the presence of gravity. We have, that gives us the sense of up and down and left and right, and the entire body functions, whether it is the growth of our tissues, whether it is the functioning of our blood circulation system. Everything is designed for working here. Now, once they have touched down, they will have to be taken care of. Generally, most of the time, the astronauts have to be lifted up without letting them to bear their own weight on their own legs, because that is very crucial. That is a moment when anything, the person can. This reorientation takes time, so they are taken back, and then there is another aspect of having to quarantine them. That although we have been going to space for a long time, but even then we take precautions. We ensure that there is no contamination from the space coming to them. Plus, at the same time, their reorientation for the normal life. I won't like to comment on the details of that because these are worked out for in each individual case, depending upon the individual person, depending upon the time the person is spent in the space, and several other factors. So that kind of a schedule is already laid down, and these people, all the 4 astronauts, will be undergoing that particular specifically laid down process, which will be over a few days, next few days, or maybe a week or so, and then they will be, then they will be leading the normal life as such.
Absolutely. Dr. Ravi Kumar Gupta, thank you ever so much for detailing some more information there as that AX4 mission lands in the sea. We will bring you any further updates from that as we get them. But we move on now, and Chinese President Xi Jinping has met with foreign ministers and heads of standing bodies of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in Beijing ahead of the SCO summit. Meanwhile, India's External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, was among those who called on President Xi. Jaishankar said he conveyed greetings from the Indian President and Prime Minister Narendra Modi and praised the recent improvements in bilateral ties. This was Jaishankar's first visit to China since the military standoff began along the line of actual control in eastern Ladakh in May 2020. Jaishankar also held talks with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi. Additionally, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov also met with President Xi Jinping in Beijing on the sidelines of the summit. Lavrov conveyed best wishes from President Vladimir Putin and discussed bilateral political contacts and preparations for Putin's upcoming visit to China, where he will attend the SCO summit. President Xi praised relations with Russia and reaffirmed his commitment to further strengthen strategic cooperation with Moscow. Well, joining us to discuss these developments is Andrew K.P. Leung, a Chinese strategist who's joining us live from London. Andrew, thank you, as always, for joining us on the programme. Some significant meetings going on between President Xi and these foreign ministers. We know earlier as well, President Xi met with Anthony Albanese, the Australian Prime Minister. What's the significance of these meetings at a time of instability globally, not just on battlefields, but also in economics?
I think these meetings come at a time when the whole world order has been completely upended by what Trump is doing, not only to its perceived adversary, China, Russia, but on its traditional allies across the Atlantic and in Asia and other regions. Replacing the rule-based order, the so-called liberal rule-based order, which has brought great deal of benefits to the United States and the rest of the world since the end of the Second World War, and replacing them with rules of the jungle focusing on American first and imposing Americans' will, left, right, and center. So I think that despite the long-standing rivalry and conflicts across the border, the line of actual control, both China and India are seeing this as an opportunity to, first of all, de-escalate the frictions, because these disagreements are unlikely to be resolved anytime soon. But rather than allowing them to escalate and poison relations and further stabilize the region, both countries see the need to open channels for dialogue, to resolve some of the differences, at least to stabilize the situation, and to seek areas for cooperation on regional security, on green energy, on climate change, on science, on a host of other things. And that's why it's important. It's not just bilateral relations between India and China, it's also taking it into consideration the changed dynamics around the world and in the region.
Yes, Andrew, just a quick question on the strength of the SCO. Of course, this comes in the wake of the tensions between India and Pakistan, two member nations. Also, allegiances with the United States with certain countries who, of course, have had conflicts and difficult conversations with both Russia and China, whether that's been the Russia-Ukraine war or trade. With those negotiations and relationships still teetering on the edge, is the SCO weaker as a result of that instability?
Well, naturally. I mean, we have talked a great deal about the war in Ukraine, and now the ongoing war, conflict in the Middle East, and of course not least in the South China Sea with the Philippines and Japan and South Korea, and of course the Hawkers nuclear submarine deal with Australia and the UK, and last but not least the Quad, of which India forms a part, with Australia and Japan, part of the China containment policy. But in spite of all these dynamics, as I was trying to explain, the whole world's order has now completely changed compared with even a year ago, whereby the so-called liberal world order based on rules largely followed and by most of the world is now being thrown out of the window. And then the United States is putting pressure on allies and friends alike, and trumping American first, and hurting the sovereignty and also economic interests of its allies and as well as its adversary like China. So I think that in that situation, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, even though it's in Central Asia, of course carries a degree of importance because it's in the right in the center of connectivity, transport links between China across the western part of China to Central Asia, linking Central Asia and the Eurasia to China's manufacturing and trade juggernaut through the so-called Middle Corridor across the Caspian Sea into Turkey. So I think that the Shanghai Cooperation Organization also, of course, are composed of the landlocked countries that are quite rich in natural resources, but what they need is transport link connectivity to export their minerals and finished products to the rest of the world. So I think that's a lot of geopolitical, economic considerations involved in these, in emphasis on the Shanghai Cooperation and indeed in the whole of the Global South.
Yes, Andrew, do stay with us. We're going to stay in the Indo-Pacific region and specifically look at China, whose foreign ministry spokesperson, Lin Jian, has said that China firmly opposes any form of official exchanges between the United States and Taiwan, responding to reports that Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te could make transit stops in the US next month, as he will be on a visit to Paraguay and Belize. The Foreign Ministry spokesperson also said that the US must understand how sensitive the Taiwan issue is and act with the utmost caution. Taiwan's president is expected to visit Paraguay in around 30 days, according to Paraguayan President Santiago Peña. Paraguay is one of just 12 countries that maintain formal diplomatic relations with Taiwan and the only one in South America. Taiwan's presidential office has not yet confirmed the trip, but China considers Taiwan part of its territory, while Taipei maintains that it has the right to engage freely with other countries. Well, Andrew, thank you for staying with us. Of course, this announcement coming with some uncertainty and a potential for rising tensions if Lai Ching-te does make the trip over to the United States after this visit. How would that be received by China, and what would be the response by China?
Well, of course, Taiwan has long not been recognized by the United Nations as a sovereign state. And China is now regarded as the sovereign nation representing China. And that one China policy has been upheld by the United States. But on the other hand, the United States also have a Taiwan Relations Act empowering the US administration to supply arms to defend Taiwan. And of course, the Taiwan question is increasingly being used as a counterweight against China's influence in the Asia-Pacific and over the South China Sea. Now, there is a great deal of rhetoric in the West that somehow Beijing is preparing to invade Taiwan, if necessary, by 2027. But I think that this rhetoric is much misplaced because Beijing, I think, is seeing it as a trap because any kind of military action across the Taiwan Strait carries huge risks. And because the waters are choppy, and also because the distance and because the logistic involved in it is a nightmare. Now, the reunification of Taiwan has of course been emphasized by President Xi many times, but the preference is still on peaceful unification, which has been enshrined in 3 successive white papers issued by Beijing, the last coincided with the provocative visit by Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan. Now, how is peaceful unification going to be achieved? But the people on both sides are increasingly interacting with one another. You've got tourism on both sides, and then as many at one time, maybe even 1 million Taiwanese, together with their families, are already living and working on the mainland on their businesses. Even down, the number is down to about 200 and 300,000. But a lot of Taiwanese people and businesses are establishing their ventures in China, and also, of course, you've got film directors and so on, featuring in Chinese make films in Beijing. You can see the director, Mr. So-and-so from Taiwan, China, film stars and artists. So I think that there is a great deal of person-to-person exchanges. And of course, you mentioned about these diplomatic visits, and the diplomatic space for Taiwan has been largely squeezed, as then only a very small handful of small countries are still establishing relationship with Taiwan. So through diplomatic containment, through people-to-people exchanges, through the economic kind of gravitas pivoting towards mainland China, and also through military means, if you like, warning to separatist elements. Now, of course, Taiwan has now elected a leader which is a hardcore separatist, and that's why Beijing is rattling up this rhetoric, sounding a warning, but that doesn't mean that Beijing is going to invade Taiwan anytime soon.
Yes, and Andrew, I want to ask a question to provide some context to this story for people who might not have the sort of historical knowledge on this situation. Why does China really care about this situation? Taiwan has been governed for so long. What's the reason for China's strength on this position over Taiwan and looking at that reunification as a real key point of policy?
Well, Taiwan has been part of China for a very, very long time. If you look at history, if you Google, you can see that Taiwan was part of the Ming Dynasty. I mean, you're talking about the 600s, or the 1300s rather. When the Ming Dynasty stationed a garrison, and Emperor Zhang Chenggong was in Taiwan. And of course, the Taiwanese people have the same culture, and the reunification is very central to China's national psyche of a recovery of China's renaissance, China being a united country, including Taiwan and of course all the other provinces, and including Tibet and Xinjiang, and the whole of China has been there for a long, long time. And because of the so-called century of humiliation, when China was subject to foreign aggression and partition, so the natural sovereignty is natural psyche is supported by the vast majority of Chinese people around the world.
Yes, absolutely. And Andrew, just to bring an end to this discussion, of course, military drills currently ongoing by the Taiwanese military. We know China have reacted. We brought that to our audience this morning. What is the significance of these drills in the wake of these heightened tensions?
Are you asking me?
Yes, Andrew. Yes, please.
Yes. Well, of course, I mean, these drills are there to send a signal to separatist elements in Taiwan, and also putting up the pressure on kind of pro-independence movement. If you look at the Taiwanese people, most people do not want to immediate unification. They want just to maintain the status quo, but the status quo has been going on for so long, and President Xi has made it quite plain that the deadline for unification by any means is 2049, which is the 100th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. But the preference, as I was trying to explain, is still peaceful unification, and that's why China put a lot of emphasis on people-to-people exchanges, integration of the Taiwanese economy into China, opening up opportunities for up-and-coming Taiwanese entrepreneurs, But on the other hand, trying to and doubling down on military warning in exercises, missiles, and also battleships surrounding Taiwan, suggesting that even the Taiwan blockade is quite possible, not to mention China's missile range and other military assets. So I think that this is a multi-pronged approach to bringing Taiwan back to the motherland eventually. But ideally, sending a warning to separatist elements, using military exercises, but also through peaceful means by promoting people-to-people exchanges, investments, and economic connectivity.
Andrew KP Leung, as always, thank you ever so much for joining us and providing that insight. We do now have some breaking news to bring you coming from Moscow, and the Kremlin is reportedly responding with caution to a sharp ultimatum issued by US President Donald Trump. Calling Trump's remarks serious, Russian officials say they need time to analyse the statement in which Trump warned Moscow it has 50 days to end the war in Ukraine or face a crippling 100% tariff on all goods. The Kremlin adds that President Vladimir Putin will respond if he considers it necessary. At the same time, Moscow has accused Washington and Brussels of sending signals that encourage Kyiv to prolong the conflict. Just to provide some more context there, US President Donald Trump also speaking about third-party tariffs which would be placed on nations which are currently buying energy from Russia. That includes China, India and other leading economies globally. So the ramifications of this situation is huge, not just affecting Russia if those sanctions come in, but as mentioned, several other countries as well. Joining us to discuss Russia's response here to this news that we brought you overnight, Mark Sutherland, a geopolitical commentator who is joining us from London. Mark, did you expect this response from Moscow, saying caution is needed and that a response will take time? Or is this the standard response we expect given such an ultimatum from the US president?
Thomas, good to join you. On the one hand, I am not surprised, especially in the light of the events that are going on in Ukraine and Trump's frustration in regard to not being able to come to a deal in regard to that conflict. And there is a huge arc here of history to explain. But I'm not surprised at all. I mean, your previous guest, Andrew, where we are, he's discussing what's been going on with China, with Taiwan, mentioning all the links, and it all comes back to the BRICS nations getting together. The bottom line is, America, of course, the dollar is still the reserve currency. The BRICS countries, unification there, they want a multipolar world. They are really flexing their muscles. The China economy, no matter what we think about it, of course, it is the biggest it is becoming the biggest economy in the world. It's a huge threat to America. That's a huge thing to discuss here. And of course, the alignment with Russia and China. They are relying on the industrial power of China. So there is to me, in my opinion, there's a continuity here. They will be talking to each other to then say, no, we must push back against these kind of comments from President Trump. I'm not surprised at all, Thomas.
Yes, Mark, let's look as well at not just tariffs and sanctions. Of course, Donald Trump talking about aid for Ukraine, talking about billions of dollars in military aid support heading to Kyiv. Also European leaders talking about that as well. So what significance could this have on the conflict? Will it extend a conflict that is already into its fourth year? Or is this a necessary deterrent that Donald Trump has decided is needed given the failure to agree to a ceasefire deal with this final ultimatum, potentially the last option with US intervention?
He wants to get people to the table, Thomas. He wants Zelensky, Russia to sit down and to thrash this out. And it is exasperation, I feel, on his part as well. So it's turning around and saying, right, I've now got to up the ante. The important thing is that we have to go back in history, and people may dispute this, but when the wall came down in 1989, NATO promised that it would not expand its NATO aggression up to the borders of Russia. It has then done that by other countries coming over under the NATO axis. That is what the grievance is in regard to Russia. Then, of course, the Minsk agreement around about 2014, and then going back on that. Then the what's happened in 2014 and another coup. So this is what others are reacting to, which is outside players playing and interfering with the Ukraine, with that axis, and Russia have turned around and said, no more, we had enough. Now, I'm not excusing the invasion at all, but when over here our previous Prime Minister Boris Johnson had the opportunity to then, there was a deal on the table to say, right, well, we'll negotiate this, and then he's flying over there and going to Zelensky, no, don't do this. The fact that no one has actually pushed for peace, except until then Donald Trump becomes President 47 to then push it. No matter what people think of him, his wanting a deal, he has then pushed that. He is frustrated with Vladimir Putin's reaction, and the death on both sides, the death toll is awful, and the consequences of that war with all the death and destruction are awful. But we have to see this exactly like what Andrew was saying in regard to Taiwan and China and history. We have to see this in a historical context, and Ukraine has a very, very unique history in regard to building up to the Second World War, what happened during it after with Stalin as well. And we have to understand this. It's very easy for so many of us to come up with quick, instant sound bites, because we're looking, and I'm not having a go at you or the station, but we're looking at the events now, and then we have to understand the build up to that. And there are many players that have been profoundly irresponsible. So when you then have Poroshenko leading before the coup, I will call it, in 2014, pushing out, then leaning towards Europe, and then eventually then going to back leaning to Russia, and then he gets kicked out, and then the consequences of that, and then how that happened, are extremely relevant now and have to be looked at. People, we want this war to end in Ukraine and Russia, and we want that to end as quickly as possible, with that, as I say, with all the casualties on both sides. And by then turning around and saying, okay, I'm going to give Ukraine the weapons that it needs. Yes, it's provocative. Yes, it's taking things to the brink again. So we will see. But he wants the two parties to sit down, and he's desperately trying to bang heads together, in my opinion.
Yes, absolutely. Mark, do stay with us. We have a related development. And according to reports, US President Donald Trump had privately encouraged Ukraine to step up deep strikes on Russian territory, even asking President Volodymyr Zelensky whether he could strike Moscow if the US provided long-range weapons. The conversation took place during a July 4th call between both of the leaders following Trump's phone call with Vladimir Putin a day earlier. Trump reportedly signalled his backing for the idea, saying the strikes would make them feel the pain and force the Kremlin to the negotiating table. The discussion reportedly led to a list of potential weapons for Kyiv being shared by the US side with Zelensky in Rome last week. Well, Mark, lots to unpack here, of course. Firstly, I want to caution that these are reports, of course. We wait for for confirmation from either side to confirm that these discussions have taken place, if that confirmation ever comes through. But looking at the reports and believing them on somewhat face value, do you think that this shift with Ukraine targeting Moscow and longer-range strikes into Russia, do you think that would have the desired effect of ending this conflict sooner, or could it rile Russia up and lead to more provocation, in your opinion?
In my opinion, we've been poking the bear since 1989. That is, in my opinion. Others, of course, would disagree. I mean, one of the reasons why Putin went into Georgia in 2005 is because Georgia was on a preferred list of joining NATO. That's why, respectfully, I say we have to look at history. Am I defending his reactions in 2022? No. But on the other hand, we then have to turn around and say, why were people then provoked? If we look at the Crimea and the Donbass, and we look at Russian speaking, we look within Ukraine turning around and not wanting people to speak Russian, coming against them in that regard, there has been a long build-up. In regard to these reports, frankly, I hope that they are not true whatsoever, because it then adds to the provocation. And there are, I am sure, missiles and armaments, of course, that are then directed at the US that could then do damage as well. That's the last thing that we would want to see on both sides. Even though I will say this to you, Thomas, there is, to me, I feel within Europe, within the UK, there is this, I feel there's provocation in regard to a wider war. It would then, some people would call it conspiratorial, but it then would then suit people. If you are then in an economic crisis, an economic downturn, then history have constantly said, well, then we're revert to war. And the UK government has been doing, and the UK, even with previous governments within the Conservative, has been doing saber rattling for far too long. There is technology. If Iran, not wanting to bring up another subject in some ways, but if Iran is then wanting to develop ballistic missiles and have the capability to then travel thousands of miles to then hit America, God forbid, then it's going to be, there is no doubt that other countries, Russia, would also have that technology and that capability as well. As I say, without constantly sounding as I'm repeating myself on this, Thomas, I hope that those reports are unfounded, and in many ways, until we could see that and proof of that, then we could then comment.
Yes, absolutely. Mark, stay with us once again. We are going to stay in Europe now, and the European Union's Foreign Affairs Council is set to meet in Brussels on the 15th of July to discuss several key international issues with a focus on Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine and the escalating conflict in Gaza. Finland's State Secretary Pasi Rajala will represent the country at the meeting. Rajala emphasised that the EU must maintain support for Ukraine, pointing out that Russia's continued bombardment of Ukrainian cities shows President Putin's lack of interest in genuine peace talks. Another major issue on the table will be the situation in Gaza, where the EU continues to push for a ceasefire. In addition to discussions on Gaza, the Council will also address developments in Georgia and the Mediterranean region. In a parallel meeting, EU foreign ministers will discuss potential actions against Israel over its military campaign in Gaza. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas has proposed several sanctions, including the suspension of cooperation deals, sanctions against Israeli ministers, and an arms embargo. However, the EU states remain deeply divided over the issue, and diplomats suggest that no concrete actions will be taken for now. The presence of Syrian Foreign Minister Assad Hassan al-Shabaini at the meeting has drawn attention as well, as Israel and Syria have been engaging in quiet diplomatic efforts to explore possible peace agreements. While the EU struggles to find a unified stance, Israel's Foreign Minister Gideon Saar remains confident that the bloc will not impose any major sanctions. He noted that Israel has made progress in improving humanitarian access to Gaza, though he acknowledged that more does need to be done. Let's listen to those comments.
There is a war going there, and what's happening on the ground there, mainly with regard to the GHF initiative, is that Hamas is trying to stop people from get the aid directly, because they want to be the mediators of the humanitarian aid. That's how it became a financial resource for Hamas in Gaza Strip. They are threatening the people, they shoot at people, they kidnap some people, they killed Palestinians, they also attacked Americans there. But first of all, it is crucial that this aid will be given to the people. And secondly, it's also important to disconnect Hamas from the aid. And this is part of the things that were raised in our dialogue with the EU.
Meanwhile, Denmark has shown interest in providing additional military support, potentially offering Patriot missile systems to enhance regional security. Let's have a listen to Lars Løkke Rasmussen, the Danish foreign minister, and what they had to say.
We don't have these kind of systems, the Patriot systems, so if we should lean in that, and we are absolutely ready to do so, it will be, money. And we have to work out the details. It could be the Ukrainian buying it themselves, and then we have to, support Ukraine, or it could be directly payment to US. I think we must work out the details. The most important thing is that we now have American readiness to deliver these most needed weapons.
Moreover, the Dutch foreign minister has announced that the Dutch government is positively considering a request to financially support the US weapons plan for Ukraine. According to Foreign Minister Casper Veldkamp, the Dutch government is looking into the Patriot systems and its potential support. The minister also expressed hope that other countries could contribute to the plan. Well, thank you, Mark, for staying with us. That was a little bit jumbled there. We had Russia, Ukraine, Israel, back to Russia, Ukraine, but we've spoken a lot about the European conflict. I'd like to move our attentions now over to the ongoing Gaza war. Israel and Hamas, of course, engaged in discussions over diplomacy, but those are continuing to stall. Potential sanctions coming from the EU. There has been divide, we mentioned that, but also key European nations speaking out against the humanitarian situation and the aid distribution within the Gaza enclave. Do you think that a bloc of EU nations could come together to agree sanctions on an issue that is so divisive?
Hamas is a terrorist group. We need to make that very, very clear. They have been firing rockets since coming into power in Gaza in 2007. On the 7th of October 2023, they attacked Israel. They killed 1,200 of the Israeli citizens, injured many more on their incursions in. They have then built a huge tunnel network underneath. They do not fight under the Geneva Convention of 1949, but everyone expects, and the Israeli army do, to then fight under that convention. They are not an army, they are terrorists. The EU, and in painting this, and again, we have to go down a historical line, because of the way that the EU, particularly with the pan-Arab discussions from 1973, the reliance on oil, etc., etc. As far as I'm concerned, and within the UN, there is a bias in regard to where Israel is concerned and the actions of Israel, and this really stepped up from 1967 after the Six-Day War sanctions. This affects Europe. If you then have sanctions against Israel, in my opinion, you are then siding with a terrorist group that are within Gaza. The Israelis left Gaza in 2005 to then give the Palestinian people, as addressed, a two-state solution. They had turned down four offers of that beforehand. They were given that land. They then, all Jewish communities withdrew, etc., etc. They were given the opportunity to then set up businesses to then, because the infrastructure was left, it used to export flowers, etc., all over the world from that region. They were then given the opportunity to turn it into the French Riviera equivalent. They decided under an ideology of jihadism to not do that. Hamas is a section of, they follow the Muslim Brotherhood ideology and mindset. Now, as much as that may be unpopular to say, European leaders will not face this, will not face the history, and will not, after all of the history that we could go through, and we need many hours to discuss that, of the fact that the land is there for the Jewish people that came about in 1948 after the Second World War. People then, international law through the UN, wish to dispute all that, and as I say, we need a number of hours to do that. Israel needs to finish the job because for its own security, whether people like it, whether people like that or not. Unfortunately, war is an appalling undertaking. It is profoundly messy, and sadly people get killed. When Hamas give out figures, those figures are not true, as they are a lot lower. The amount of figures in regard to the combatant death per civilian death are incredible with what the Israeli army are able to then achieve. Am I saying that war is good? No, but Israel did not start that. Hamas is then, like Hezbollah, like the Houthis, is a proxy of Iran, and Iran's whole ideology is to wipe Israel off the face of the earth and to then pour out the last drop of Jewish blood, because then its ideology says our Mahdi comes back and then we have heaven.
Yes, Mark, sorry to interject. We are running shorter on time, and there are a couple of further points that I would like to discuss with you, but thank you ever so much for the insight on that issue, and we of course will be across all the developments from this upcoming EU summit. But we stay again in Europe, and weeks before the deadly crash of Air India flight AI-171 in Ahmedabad, British aviation authorities had warned that Boeing aircrafts, including the 787 Dreamliner involved in the tragedy, may have faulty fuel shut-off switches. The UK Civil Aviation Authority issued a safety notice on May the 15th this year, urging all operators of Boeing 737, 757, 767, 777 and 787 models to immediately review US FAA directives and carry out checks or replacements. The notice referred to a potential unsafe condition involving fuel shut-off valves and stressed they need for urgent compliance. A preliminary investigation on the deadly Indian plane crash has confirmed that fuel supply to both engines was cut off within a second of each other, causing the loss of thrust. The Directorate General of the Civil Aviation has now ordered all airlines in India operating Boeing 737 and 787 aircraft to inspect the fuel switch locking system by July the 21st. We move on now, and China has condemned the United States' coercion after President Donald Trump threatened very severe tariffs on Moscow's remaining trade partners if Russia doesn't resolve its ongoing war in Ukraine within 50 days. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Lin Jian voiced strong opposition to the US stance, stating that China rejects illegal unilateral sanctions and long-arm jurisdiction. Lin emphasised that no one benefits from a tariff war and that such tactics of coercion and pressure will not solve international issues. The remarks come as tensions rise between the two global powers, with the US ramping up economic pressure on Russia and its allies amid the conflict in Ukraine. Let's listen in to what Lin Jian had to say.
方在乌克兰危机问题上的立场一贯明确，我们始终认为，对话谈判是解决乌克兰危机的唯一可行出路。中方坚决反对任何非法单边制裁和长臂管辖。关税战没有赢家，胁迫施压解决不了问题。希望各方能为推动乌克兰危机政治解决进一步营造氛围、积累条件，多做有益于劝和促谈。
Yes, and I just want to thank Mark Sutherland for joining us earlier on the programme. We move on now, though, and the European Union's aid chief, Hadja Lahbib, says Israel is not fully implementing the Gaza agreement, adding that while some progress is visible on the ground, it is far from sufficient. Speaking on the situation in Gaza, Lahbib acknowledged minor improvements in aid access and humanitarian conditions, but stressed that the pace remains too slow. She urged Israel to take further steps to meet its commitments under the deal, calling for sustained international pressure to ensure meaningful progress. Well, joining us to discuss this is Dr. Satoru Nagao, a fellow at the Hudson Institute, who is joining us from Tokyo, Japan. As always, Dr. Nagao, thank you ever so much for joining us towards the end of the programme today. Let's look at the situation on the ground. Of course, conversations around a ceasefire have generally been positive, it seems, with optimism coming from the US and Israel, with mediators like Qatar and Egypt also involved, but questions being raised about the speed in which this process is moving forward. What are your thoughts initially?
In this case, the core problem is Israel wished elimination of the Hamas because they are terrorists and they have attacked seriously. But the Hamas side tried to survive. So indeed, this is a negotiation of the zero and sum. So that's why for a long time it is very difficult to conclude between the two sides. But now the situation is gradually changed because the Hamas supported by Iran, but Iran's supporting power is declining drastically. So that's why the Hamas military power, of course, they are losing, and the supporting power from Iran is also losing. So under such kind of situation, this is a little bit better chance for Israel to agree to terminate Hamas. And indeed, recent development also supports the situation because instead of the United Nations, who need to act under the Hamas governments, instead of the United Nations, U.S. NGOs start to deliver the food. So that's why the influence from Hamas is very limited to the people in the Gaza too. So that's why this is a little bit better chance compared with the past, better chance to agree. But still, one of the core problems exists. For Israel, the survival of Hamas is not acceptable. And for Hamas, the termination of the Hamas is not acceptable. So that problem, how to solve, is the matter. Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Nagao, unfortunately, we are out of time, but thank you ever so much for joining us as always on the programme. It is now time for us to have a look at some stories specifically from the Indo-Pacific region. 11 people are missing after a boat capsized in bad weather off of Indonesia's Mentawai Islands in West Sumatra on Monday morning. Of the 18 on board, including 10 local government officials, 7 have been rescued. The boat was travelling from Sikakap to Taupajat. Search operations continue with 2 rescue boats and dozens of personnel deployed. This comes after a separate ferry disaster near Balboat capsized earlier this month that left 18 people dead, with 17 still sadly missing. Chinese companies are racing to buy NVIDIA's H20 AI chips as the firm prepares to resume sales in China. NVIDIA is seeking US license approval after restrictions halted shipments earlier this year. Major firms like ByteDance and Tencent are submitting orders. CEO Jensen Huang is in Beijing and announced a new RTX Pro GPU made for China, fully compliant with export rules. The move comes amid improved US-China tech relations and easing tensions in the chip trade. Tesla has officially entered the Indian automobile market with the launch of its first showroom at Mumbai's Bandra Kurla complex. For now, the company plans to offer just one model, the Model Y, available in 2 variants, rear-wheel drive and long-range rear-wheel drive. As Tesla prepares to navigate the world's 3rd largest auto market, it faces competition from from premium brands like Mercedes-Benz and BMW, along with homegrown rivals such as Tata Motors and Mahindra. Nissan is set to shut its flagship Oppama plant in Kanagawa, Japan by March 2028 to cut costs and streamline operations. All vehicles produced from the plant will shift to Nissan Motors Kyushu in Fukuoka. The Oppama factory, which produced the Leaf EV in 2010, has been a symbol of innovation for Nissan. However, the company is undergoing a major restructuring to improve profitability, marking the plant's closure as a strategic move. Well, that's all we have time for, but we will be back with more of the latest breaking news from across the world.